Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this one, we're going to be doing something really fun that's going to make the game a lot easier for you guys. We're going to take one of the best weapons in the game, and since buffs are still working on ashes, we're going to turn it into something absolutely crazy. We're on New Game Plus 7. Let's get into the details. So a while back, I came to the conclusion that Night Comet was one of the best, if not the best builds in Elden Ring, simply for the fact that you could destroy bosses before they were even near you. However, buffs aren't really working for spells and incantations on 1.09 as they should work, so for right now, we're going to buff up the Blasphemous Blade, turn it into one of, if not the best build in Elden Ring. As you guys may know, as a content creator on console, I play a lot on New Game Plus 7 because that's where most of my characters are at this point, so everything has a lot more HP. If you're wondering whenever I get stuck, the Blasphemous Blade is one of the weapons that I always turn to if there's ever an issue because it's so powerful and so reliable. But before we continue, I want to show you a test real quick to show that buffs are still working on ashes and melee weapons. You're going to see here with no buffs, we did around 2800, and then after I do the buffs here in short order, we're going to try Howl first to see if there's an increase, and I'm going to show you on screen that there is an increase. Buffs are working for Ashes of War, skills, melee weapons, but they are not working properly for incantations and spells that I know of from my own testing. You're going to see after Howl here, we have an increase in damage. Then we're going to combine Golden Vow and Howl of Shabriri to show you the even more increase in damage and to show that Ashes of War weapon skills are something that you can still buff right now to do extreme damage. You're going to see on screen here that buffs, when used, Golden Vow and Howl of Shabriri together, they're going to combine for even more damage than Howl and obviously more than the base damage itself, showing that you can still buff weapon skills, Ashes of War, and then just your regular melee hits and whatnot can be buffed as well. However, again, incantations and spells don't seem to be working properly with buffs on 1.09. I'm not sure whether it's intended. I don't think it is intended. So the Blasphemous Blade's weapon skill, Taker's Flames, is something that we're going to buff up here because we can buff it up. It does massive fire damage. It heals you on top of everything. We're going to go over the buffs, by the way, and we're able to get massive damage out of the weapon skill on this. It's incredible how much we can do. One of the most reliable weapons in the game. Buffing it up even further and turning it into something that does extreme levels of damage and takes down bosses with ease. The best thing about the Blasphemous Blade, I've always said this, is its reliability and its ease of use. Now, since the range on the weapon skill or Ash of War, or whatever you want to call it, is actually quite good, it really does turn into something when you're buffing it that not only is easy to use and buff, but can take down bosses, even certain bosses you're going to see later in this video, from a little bit of a distance too, and it's quite impressive what it could do. And as a faith user, somebody like myself that enjoys strength and faith, that's basically my #1 type of build is either faith or strength faith. This is obviously the perfect weapon for me. It's a perfect weapon for a lot of people. Some people claim the Blasphemous Blade is actually a little bit boring because it's that easy to use. But the issue is if you're ever stuck on a boss, if you're ever having trouble with a boss, the majority of the game, for the most part, can be taken on with the Blasphemous Blade with ease. It's something for me, at least, if I'm stuck, especially on some of the late game bosses. Fire Giant isn't that difficult for me at this point. There's so many different builds I can use on him. But as far as Beast Clergyman, Malekith, all the late game bosses, you can pretty much run through them with the Blasphemous Blade with no problem whatsoever because it's just that good. And then knowing now how easy it is to buff with everything, to come up with a buffing system for it to even do more damage makes it a very, very incredible weapon to use. And I did buff other things like Black Flame Tornado as well. I don't like the hyper armor on Black Flame Tornado, the fact that you can literally just get knocked out of it. So the Blasphemous Blade definitely, as far as strength faith weapons, Faith Ashes of War weapon skills, I believe is my favorite in the game because it's super overpowered. I think it's something that you're going to enjoy too. As time goes on here and I show you the buffing system and what you can do with the Blasphemous Blade, this is on New Game Plus 7. Everything has a ridiculous amount of HP and we're still able to do massive damage. And then of course you obviously heal back on the weapon skill as well. It's one of the most broken and overpowered weapons in the game. So turning around and using buffs on it make it even easier to use. And if you're ever stuck or in trouble, this is something that could be like your safety net to move forward because it's that powerful. You're going to see the buffing system on screen here, but don't worry, I'm going to go over it in a little bit along with build, stats, equipment, everything you need to know. This is at 150 on New Game Plus 7, by the way. If you're not in the Discord, definitely be sure to join that. There's almost 400 people in there. It's been awesome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button too. Let's take on Morgott. So for Morgott, he's a little bit difficult for some people, but he's not overly difficult for the majority of people, especially as you go on to later journeys, because you do have the shackle, and then he has 0 fire resistance, which obviously is going to help us as well, because he takes the full complement of fire damage, not extra damage, but just neutral to fire. But you're going to see here the amount of damage we're able to do to Morgott, this is a really powerful Blasphemous Blade build. And if you're somebody that likes buffing stuff and the stuff you're normally buffing isn't working right now, this one is definitely gold as far as buffing. Does ridiculous levels of damage. It can take on the majority of bosses with ease. This is something, by the way, that I've used personally on the later journeys to get through certain bosses because it's just convenient and easy to do so. I'm going to show one more boss here. We're going to show it off on mobs, and then we're going to go over stats, equipment, and the entire buffing system. There is one thing really quick that I'm going to explain that I don't think I'll have time to explain later. I'm using the Ritual Swords Talisman instead of the Red Feathered Branch Sword because I'm not sure whether or not it counts for the Blasphemous Blade, since that first contact hit is always going to seemingly put you over 20%. I'm not sure how useful it is to use it since you're constantly gaining HP by using the weapon skill, so I avoided that and went for the Ritual Swords Talisman. So as far as mobs go, I'm going to show you here, we didn't really do anything crazy with buffs for mobs because there's no point. Blasphemous Blade is something that can take them on any day of the week. It is one of the strongest against mobs. It knocks them back, does a lot of damage. This is something that's really impressive, especially if you have an enemy or groups of enemies. You pretty much knock them all down and do massive damage. So on mobs, you're going to see I continue to just use that weapon skill because it does massive damage. And again, as I mentioned prior, it does knock them down as well. So it's something impressive that you can do. As far as mobs, they group up. You can use that weapon skill and absolutely annihilate them. This is one of the best for it. If you're ever having trouble and you haven't used the Blasphemous Blade yet, there's never a better time to use the Blasphemous Blade. And by the way, there was a poll recent for the elemental damage, what types you guys used the most, and it had a couple thousand votes, I think, on it, and the most was fire, which really didn't surprise me because fire is a really good elemental damage type in Elden Ring. So as far as NPC invader type enemies, this is obviously the one that you go for Mog now. If you want to take the route that doesn't involve PvP, you have to fight the Beast Claw guy here. Yeah, he went down with ease as you can see there. Let's get into equipment for this build. So for equipment, we have the Blasphemous Blade plus 10. Any seal will do, but I like the Giant Seal if you're throwing in some fire incantations. We have a random set, Black Dumpling and Mushroom Crown, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander. We have the Kindred of Exultation, Fire Scorpion Charm, Fire Tear. Then we have the Fetid Pots and Boluses as well. Let's get into stats before we get into buffs. So for stats on this, we went with High Faith. We went for basically the minimum requirements. I'm two-handing it, so it doesn't matter at this point. So 20 is fine, or 22. And then to get your Faith stat as high as possible, because the Ash of War scales almost entirely, if not entirely, with your Faith stat. Also, as you can see here, we left enough endurance in case you want good armor, good poise. You got enough there, and then we went for 50 vigor minimum. At 150, these are really well-rounded stats that I like for this build to get massive damage out of the Blasphemous Blade. Let's get into buffs. For buffs, the first thing that I like to do is proc the Black Dumpling. That gives you an extra 10% damage for a minute. It's generic damage, by the way, for a minute when you go mad. And after we proc that, we're going to be switching it out for the Mushroom Crown. And you're going to see on screen here, after it's proc, the switch out to the Mushroom Crown so that we can poison proc for a whole bunch of extra damage at the end of this. Now, after that, you can fill up your FP, and then we're going to use the longer stuff. So the longer stuff here is going to be Blessings, Boon, and Golden Vow because they last longer, so we're going to get those out of the way first, and you're not too time constrained with those. They last a decent amount of time. Fill up our FP again. Then we're going to use Howl of Shabriri one more time to reboot that 25% generic damage boost, and then we're going to use the Fetid Pots and Boluses to poison proc and heal for another 30% more damage, and then we get to use that awesome weapon skill. I hope you guys enjoyed this video on taking the Blasphemous Blade to extreme levels. This was really fun to do this, by the way, and this is something that you can get massive damage out of while you're waiting for buffs to work, or whether or not they come back or not. This is something that is incredibly easy to buff and does massive damage, and you get even more reward out of one of the best weapons in Elden Ring. This is a really fun one. By the way, this has been a really fun week doing all Faith builds this week. It was a nice change up from everything. If you're not on that Discord though, definitely be sure to join that. It's been an awesome community, and if you're not subbed and you love overpowered PvE builds, be sure to check out all the awesome builds that are on my channel. Thanks for watching. As always, I will catch you guys there.